Om Pramadana na sandeha kim karishyami brittiman. Utpadyante viliyante buddhischa yata jale. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Ignorance is not real. Therefore, how can it cause you any real doubt? Therefore, what does the illumined soul do with the projections of his or her mind? They let them rise spontaneously and then dissolve them all back at the end of the day, like bubbles into water. Om peace, peace, peace. Om vachum yachatmani tam nyacham. Buddhao diyam yacha cha buddhi sakshini. Tam chapi purnatmani nirvikalpe. Vilapya shantim paramam bhajasvam. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. The practitioner of blissful dissolution joins the word to the mind to the intellect to the ego to the witness to the Atman, and the Atman into Brahman. For Brahman is the soul in all things. In this way, the adept practitioner enjoys supreme peace and ecstatic bliss. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Welcome everyone into the sanctuary of SRV Loka's Dharma classes on Sunday. 3 hours of class, broken up by an intermission, but we tend to focus on these subjects very seriously and very deeply, as both the tradition of Zen, if you follow it in the ancient and traditional way, and the tradition of Advaita Vedanta ask us to do. Follow the tradition was one of the mantras in English that we heard coming from my teacher's mouth. Peace and blessings be upon him. Whenever we sat with him in Dharma classes, he would exhort us to follow the tradition, not wander off the well-beaten path. Because it may be then that you'll lose your ox, as we will look at today. Somehow you will figure in your mind that you're beside yourself, or without yourself, even worse. interesting expression in English. I'm beside myself usually means some sort of anger or confusion. But being without yourself would be probably even worse, and those are actually good names for stages of ox herding. They call these stages of spiritual evolution, or different divine territories in the life of a Zen practitioner. And side by side with that are the correlations that we looked at last week in Advaita Vedanta. And we'll look at those again side by side in these two charts I have showing you right now. One on the 10 stages of ox herding, Jugyu Nozu, and then over here Advaita Vedanta's way of Atmic realization, which we're using here in a more contemporary sense in the terms of Swami Vivekananda's Neo Vedanta, or the fresh face he painted on Vedanta for us, bringing out the teachings of the old prophets. I've not come to destroy the teachings of the old prophets, but to restore them, those ones that are pertinent to the age, as Jesus said in his time. So in Swami Vivekananda's time, up until about 1902, when he passed after his 2 visits to the West, 2 of them here in America, which we were fortunate to have, he was mentioning quite a lot taming the lion. So it reminded me a lot of ox tending, or retrieving your lost ox, so-called. And so I thought about that when I was thinking about the titles for this year's series of Sunday Dharma talks and seminars and titles for retreats we give 4 times a year as well, because we're giving online seminars too. So now, because of the format, that people don't have to travel outside of their homes to get these teachings, so they're tuning into them more. And I used that as a quip last Sunday when I said we're having a double header now. The Zen ox herders against the Vedantic lion tamers, and more than a competition, it's going to be a complement to each other. We like to approach the world traditions and the cultures that practice them through the ages in terms of harmony of religions, which is one of the higher ways of looking at religion. You can look at religion as coming from the best of human intellect, but then the seers look at that and they say that the teachings didn't come from their intellect. The intellect is just one facet of their fourfold mind. We can talk about that a little more later. But then the next thing, well, they must have come from the seers, because their intellects are much finer. Sometimes they can even transcend the intellectual frame of reference and get the teachings straight from their origin, like drinking from the mountain stream, as Milarepa says it in Tibetan Buddhism. Drinking from the source, at the source. There's always pure water there, and very refreshing, full of vital energy like prana, and in keeping with the pure location that you're at, this deepest refuge that you take in your own self when you as far as speaking in terms of Vedantic lion taming. Go to the deepest refuge and retreat in your own self, they say, where the 3 great rivers meet, that is the 3 great channels, the Sushumna in the middle, the Ida and the Pingala going around and round it up in a human form is an example, a physical example of that happening in the internal worlds, where you have this Kundalini power rising and filling the lotuses, the spiritual vortexes, if you want to put it in a more English teaching. It's rather a more mystical teaching of India. So if you want to attend upon that retreat, that most sacred inmost retreat. But anyway, it gets me started on that, but I was, at the beginning of each year, or the end of each previous year, I have to think of titles for our retreats, classes, and seminars, and so this one struck me, Zen ox herding and Vedantic lion taming. Zen ox herding, what's that, 12th century China, I think? So, you'll have to go back quite a long ways, which is a good thing for us, because we like to follow the tradition at the source and not fall victim to too many modern interpretations which tend to sometimes water down the teachings. You're not getting water from the source anymore. You're getting it from the lowlands after it's flowed a long ways down. So even into swamps. This is some fundamentalist religion, irreligion, Vivekananda called it, sometimes ends up in like swamp water. He once said that. He said, why would you give people dirty ditch water to drink when the stream of truth is flowing right nearby? You have to somehow, take the horse to that water. Hopefully it will drink. We're having a hard time having people drink from the source. So if we bring it down to a certain level, like to the mind and intellect level right now in the West, the intellectual frame of reference, trying to get thinkers to take the Dharma seriously. Because there's quite a division between people who believe in matter as being the goal of life and people who believe in spirit or divine reality as being the goal. One scratches the head looking at the other and says, I don't know why they would think of something, focus on something they can't see or hear or touch or taste or smell, and the others are saying the opposite. Thinking, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling, you're living by the senses, and those are limited, obviously, because they're not eternal, and they're giving you a false reading of things besides. So that's a doubleheader between, the worldly and the spiritual. So this would be a complementary doubleheader between two traditions that are connected, hands across the water, over 53 generations, we said last week, coming to New York, actually, when the first Zen Roshi appeared there, when Swami Vivekananda had come from India to attend the Parliament of Religions, 1893 there. I actually attended the one in 1993 myself and was a selected teacher to speak and play divine music there at the Hilton Hotel there. So basically it was a very powerful thing that happened where these traditions came from across the ocean and had a good platform to present their teachings of their tradition on. Some say that it was kind of set up, by Western fundamentalists to prove the superiority of Christianity. Whether that's true or not, it didn't work that way. We got these first big hits of Zen and these first big hits of Vedanta thanks to Vivekananda's being there. And Sri Ramakrishna was there too. Yeah, he was not in the body, for sure, by that time, but Vivekananda said that he spoke to him backstage. When he had trepidation about going out and speaking in front of this American audience for the first time. And then the master spoke to him and said, told him that he was to go there and speak. So master must have been on hand there too, as he is in everything and everywhere we know, when we think of him as the all-pervading, all-pervasive Brahman. A lot of the religions don't have a Brahman. They don't like to talk about God. They don't like to name God. But you can't cite India for being at fault for doing that, because many of the darshanas in India don't like to speak about God, like Samkhya and yoga. You won't find that word for God being used very much. In those darshanas or paths of India that are part of one umbrella tradition, which you could call the Vedanta, the Upanishads of the ancient rishis, you'll find that some of these darshanas are not concerned at all with proving the existence of God. That's kind of already a conclusion in their minds. They're just going forward to open avenues called nadis, understanding of the subject deep into the hearts and minds of living beings, as we just chanted. So in that case then, you might hear God talked about as Purusha in Sankhya, or you might hear God talked about, as Atman. But this is pertinent more to the individual and their relationship with the unthinkable, unknowable, transcendent reality, which we're not going to give a name to. But the ancient rishis of India didn't have a problem with that, because they were thinking in terms of nirguna saguna, oh, when I see it with form, then that's God with coverings, you see. I mean, maybe that teaching even got pronounced later. And at first it wasn't even with coverings, it was just with qualities. So it took on attributes, that's all. Like a tree in your mind is just a tree, but the tree out here is green, you see, or brown. So it took on colors. In your mind you don't really think of the colors necessarily, you just think of the tree. So in that way, you could see that if you're in a body on earth, you're aware that the body is just like a tree. It's just an object, and you're not an object, you're a subject. And you go on with a reasoning process like this that can get so involved as this, which I want to show you sometime today, how involved Advaita Vedanta will get you into the process of self-analysis. Zen is a bit simpler in that regard, but 12th century Zen wasn't that simple. They were using a little bit simpler language, but you can see that they had a very complex 10 plateau level of convincing people who thought they lost themselves, that their self's always with them. Because at the very first stage of ox herding, seeking the ox, the teaching is that you never lost it. It was just hiding in your yard somewhere. You came out the front of your hut, you thought it was gone, you took off, and that took you on a lifetime 10-stage search for the ox. And was it all based in a delusion? In a sense, yes, but it was also a very good practice, and it helped others to see the truth of the matter, helped them to walk on the path and find themselves in the end. And so prove themselves, prove what? That they're always nirguna, that they're always beyond attributes, and they're always one with the self. So basically you could say, like in Tantra, if you chose that as a darshan of India, well, you've got 16 evolutes there as a list that the Tantrists, and we know how involved they were with analyzing things, especially God with form. They were very excellent at doing it, God with form. Most of the other darshanas are trying to get you to a place where you jump form. Tantra is doing that too, but it's doing it by deifying everything, not by denying it. So when Tantra did its practice for a long time, and we know also, I mentioned last week, that this is why they make such a good hybrid with other religions, even other darshanas, but also other religions. When they did their deep study like that, the very first thing they would say, you just matter of fact, out of hand kind of thing, is deha jasa ahamkara, deha body, ahamkara ego. This is the first evolute of Maya, is that it convinces you to think that you're a body-mind-ego mechanism. People are just born with that. They're like helpless under that misconception. They're not either of those. They're not any of those. They're actually the Atman, free of all name and form. And it's Atman's just, as we say, taking on sheaths. And figuring out that they're not the sheaths. It could be a play at first to take on sheaths. So I think I'll masquerade down there, or out there, see, play with myself a little bit, see, and then see if I can strip the mask off at some point. And definitely when I reach the end of the play, I'll want to return to the source. That's the last sutra of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, is this primordial power called Chit-Shakti takes the transmigrating soul back to its source, and as it takes it back to its source, it strips away nature from it. So nature must have not been, it must have not been nature. Nature must have come out of it. It must have taken it on, false superimposition style, and then to the end realize, oh, I have to give this up if I want to go back to formlessness, which is my home. Well, this is all just perfectly characterized in 10 steps here, but what I'm speaking here is Advaita Vedanta, with its false superimposition, its practice of viveka vairagya, further practice of adhyaropa apavada, the attainment of 6 jewels, and then finally having a supreme desire to be free, which would require that you realize that freedom is formless. So there's where Patanjali is telling you, she will strip name and form away from you as you move towards your essence. She does both of these so that the soul can, as I just chanted here, get vilapya shantim, eternal peace, and paramam bhajasva, ecstatic bliss. That's where Brahman holds those, you see. Well, so we can't just say that, and have many people understand it. That what, you see. Oh no, we're capitalizing the word that. It means tat, you see. So maybe that will give you a clue, but we can just have this Brahman, that expands exponentially without changing, Br, the root of the word Brahman. The mind has to expand in order to know it, would be one way of defining that. So all of these stages of Zen oxherding, which we can look at, we'll be using them in their own setting, but we'll be, in this double header this weekend, we'll be showing side by side how different temperaments will approach that. If the 12th century Chinese found out that people are not understanding this version of Buddhism that came from India, maybe even came through Tibet, at least some channels of it certainly did. It's a toss-up historically whether India came first to Tibet or to China, or maybe even other places, like Ceylon was closer, it might have come there. But there's different streams of it, and it walked. Buddhism walked. That's the most amazing, it's the most amazing religion in that way, because it didn't spread by violence or by coercion or even by astute philosophy. It spread by Buddhist renunciates, mendicants walking from country to country and sharing it with people, like kings, and royalty even got this teaching. So, wow, where's that from? Well, that's from India, and that's where I'm from, you see. So this is the teaching there. Like, if you teach Dharma here in the West, like I've been doing for 50 years, so what is that, 1970 or so? So if I taught back then, people were, if you got in front of a bunch of people who didn't know anything about Vedanta, and the priest in the next room was teaching that you're a sinner, and that you're born and that you die, and that you go to heaven or hell, and you tell them that you're an eternal soul that has no location, it's vast, it's shunyata, it's empty, it doesn't have any inherent divinity to it. That would be Zen's way of saying that it's boundless. That's all there is that boundlessness. That's what you are. And you started speaking that way to these people, and then they're like Vivekananda said, charmed snakes. They couldn't understand what he was saying to them in 1893, but they were all ears. It was new and fresh. And so, that took several thousand years for that to come through the avenues of Tibet and Ceylon and Laos and China and Thailand and so forth, to make its way to Japan. So there must have been somewhere along the way when Japan was resisting Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism was resisting Zen, Japanese Buddhism. In all that period, there was coming a time when they had to make these teachings so accessible to people, and at the same time keep its non-dual essence there. So that's why in the first stage of oxherding, you walk out the door of your hut, and you thought you've lost your hut. So you're about ready to plunge into all the pathways out there. That's the second stage. By thinking that you're other than yourself, you subject yourself to all these mixed opinions. Does it sound familiar? How people, are searching for some path they want to be on. They find it. Another path conflicts with it. These are like crisscrossing paths in the forest. You're looking for an ox in all of that. And you can't. This is the most dangerous phase of Zen ox herding, because you'll get confused and waylaid, maybe for lifetimes, trying to find that ox through different pathways, when you never lost it in the first place. You are that thou art. You are the self in all. And so these are the most beautiful facets of the diamond of religion in the world, the ones that start you off with the precognition that you are the self. And they haven't come from some other vein of thinking, like from fire-darting reformers, or from people who didn't understand the message of the Savior, of people who didn't get the teaching of non-origination in this world. And they thought everything had an origin, even as far back as the Word was an origin. But that's not what the Saviors were talking about. They were talking about eternal perfection and the unchanging and ever-perfect nature of Brahman. How could you mistake that teaching? How could you think otherwise if a person with authority gave you that great seal, as Tibetan Buddhism calls it? They stamped that seal of authority upon you. How could you start thinking otherwise, that I'm not the self, that I'm not all in all, or that it doesn't exist? Those are the cross trails out there that you get into if you don't start out with the non-dual truth. So Sri Ramakrishna said, cut the head and the tail off the fish, give you the fish, the body of the fish to eat. That's what the good teacher does. And he told Vivekananda that. He said, if you take this non-dual essence I'm about to tell you, hide it away in your wearing cloth, and go to the West, as you're going to do, teach anywhere in the world, as you're going to do, as my emissary, then if you're ever in doubt at all, just take that out and look at it again. So you give people this non-dual essence first, so they hear it, they remember it, it's got the faint echoes of truth to it, or maybe not so distant. It rings right away and they wake up in one lifetime, which would be the better experiment to have, experience to have. But whatever the case, you give that to them first, and then they get out into the cross trails of religion and different perspectives and facets of religion. And then this becomes a successful journey, because they always have in the back of them that this is a play, you see. This is a game. This is a row your boat through a world of illusion. And there are people who aren't very deep in philosophy that understand this. The salt of the earth people, the humble. They know that it's all a play, and they're just participating in it to the best of their ability. So this, my usual preamble with introducing you to the subjects that we're looking at today with this halftime. See, we're at halftime now in the doubleheader, and we want to then go on with the main two charts that I chose for this one and one other, which I'll show you in a minute. But since we've started, right now the score is about 1-0, you see, in Zen's favor, because I haven't really introduced you much of the Vedanta teachings yet. I'm kind of staying to the Zen because we have a right to do that, because our our founder, Lex Hixon, was ordinated in Zen Buddhism toward the end of his life. And he was a very special being that held joint citizenship in several different religious traditions of the world. So we want to make this dovetail, we want to make this hybrid between two Advaitic systems that, as I showed you last week, across the board, all those Sanskrit words and all those Japanese words, remember? And the monk was standing in the background on a cliff with that image. And we show how all of these words are just straight across the board, mean pretty much the same thing in two different languages, in two different traditions, in two different cultures, at two different phases of time. The Sanskrit being so ancient, and the Japanese, as far as Buddhism is concerned, being so new. It's only a couple generations old in America now, Zen. And there have been some crazy wisdom or questionable teachers that have given us Zen, and probably better, we think it's better to stay to the traditional side of Zen, so that's why these teachings are being given in terms of an ongoing practice, even if the practice is just observation, like Zen is, just to see how it is, and then, not react, but realize. You don't react to things, but you realize their nature. And it's very much then like false superimposition in Vedanta, where you look at things and see through them to what's underlying them. It would be the same with human emotion. What's underlying the human emotion? So then you'd want to be using yoga psychology to understand this deeper, because our Western psychology is just an infant yet, and it's still, frittering about with feelings and sentiments. And there's no place to take people except chemistry, pills, and it's all based in money. But that's not the way great yoga psychologists like Lord Vasishta or Lord Patanjali were ever oriented. They were always oriented towards healing by first giving you the truth so that you could see through these false superimpositions called feelings right away. Ashobha, it's called in Sanskrit. You take the position of non-emotional, no reaction. It's like, in a sense, even physically, like Jesus and Gandhi. If somebody hits you, slaps you, you turn the other cheek. So there's no egoistic response there, why did you hit me, or anything. You're just kind of in wonder that a person would do that, but you just kind of want to balance it out, or help them, if they need to hit you. So you might object against the injustice, which Zen is doing nowadays, I'm noticing, in some of the movements I see. But this whole deeper teaching of non-reaction, based on knowing that this world is illusory, or that it's come from the mind, like Tibetan Buddhism is so good at stating, starts off with the first stage of hurting the ox here. Now, I mentioned Deha Jasa Hamkara. Most people here think, tantrically speaking, that they're the body. And then if they look for something else in the body, the first thing they'll go to usually is the self. So that's, of course, the false self we're talking about. Deha Jasa Hamkara. You think this self inside of you, which is a reflection of your true self, like the ripe ego and the unripe ego, or the lion and the kitty, is basically thinks that it's a physical form. And according to Tantra, that's the first evolutive Maya. So you can see how deeply ingrained it is in human beings to think this. If there is truth to the fact that animals transmigrate into human forms, and that you've had past lifetimes, and that some of your past lifetimes are animals, then you can see how deeply ingrained in the animals their habits on earth are. How they're absolutely, like Sri Ramakrishna said, the dinosaurs focused so much on the earth that they became earth. I mean, they became fossils, actually. So wherever your mind thinks, like the crystal put near any different color of flower takes on the color of that flower, wherever your mind thinks, that it will go and that it will become. So if people think about being embodied all the time, and they're not giving the teaching that I'm not the body and I'm not the ego, then they'll fall into misconception. I mean, so basically, I didn't know what order I was going to do it in, but before we look at, or we can look at the 10 stages of ox herding by first showing a rather Vedantic version of it. And we would call that in modern times green coconut oneness. We're getting that from Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa himself. because he noticed people, even in India there in his time, 1800s, that people were coming to him, and some of them were falsely presuming to know the truth. Can you give me the name of the sickness in Zen that I gave you last week? There were 8 kinds of Zen sickness. There are 5 types of Zen, and 8 of them were listed below on that chart. Moyoi it's called in Japanese. Different kinds of Zen sickness. So there are people who practice Zen for health of the body. Well, let's just go right over to Hatha Yoga here, for the correlation, you see. Then there are people who are a net of sentimental illusions and emotions. See, that's another kind. There's people who are so confused, like the second stage of ox herding, all these trails. It's called kato, or creeping vines. Remember that one? And there are people then who think that they've understood the truth of shunyata, emptiness, which is the main premise of Buddhism. Although they're beginning to modify that view a little bit with some deeper thinking, like Dalai Lama says, toward the purnyata idea of fullness, you see. The shunyata is meant to get rid of any idea that the self has a location, which means has a form, which means has a name, which means has a limitation, so forth. Get rid of that first and you'll see that it's everywhere. Sounds like purnyata to me, or sounds like iti iti. Brahman is in all this. And so you can go to different practices cited in Buddhism and in Vedanta in several different schools, like Tibetan Buddhism for that. But this is a kind of Zen sickness, you see, where a person thinks that they know the truth already, and they don't. They haven't studied yet in Vedanta or in Zen Buddhism to find out that they might be laboring under one of those 8 forms of Zen sickness. So it was a beautiful part of the class last week. I got several comments on it from people. So if we look at Sri Ramakrishna's way, the way he noticed that, there's a coconut tree, there's the coconut, and there's how we would take it apart in layers. But let's forget about all that right now, because when you first see the coconut, and the Labrador I used to own could tell you this, that it was just almost impossible to get to the core. That black female Labrador on the beach might get a hold of one of those things, and while we were swimming in the water, it would spend 2 or 3 hours tearing that coconut apart, and it wasn't getting very far, because it was a green coconut, and it hadn't developed into different layers yet. It was pulling off various levels of the exocarp, the mesocarp, the endocarp, and not getting to the core at all because the thing hadn't developed yet into layers. Well, this is like people who are unaware that the self has taken on layers. This is just, isn't it just like the 5 sheaths, the Adara system of India? They gave you that not to tell you that you're the layers. They gave you that to tell you that you're not the layers, but that you have them. I mean, usually you don't take it that far. You say, oh, I'm not that. You say, okay, well, do you really understand that, or is that still a kind of immature Zen or immature Vedanta that you're going after? Let's go further with it. You're not that, but you have that, you see. You just don't want to think of yourself as that, but you can still have that. It's called detachment, and then knowledge of oneness of everything. So you'd strip away the layers, you see. So basically, Sri Ramakrishna says this: to effectively separate the kernel of a coconut from its shell is practically impossible. But once the milk inside has completely evaporated, the kernel will separate of itself, come free, and rolling around inside independently. So you say, if you could take a riper coconut, that's brown, by the way, not green, and you shake it on the beach, clunk, 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 you can see that there's something in that. He means that's the Atman. It's come free from all the layers. But it had to get mature to do that. See, it had to be in a ripe state. So the mind has to understand by examining the layers of the coconut, the body, which exocarp would be the body, right? Mesocarp would be the prana, endocarp would be the mind, testa would be the intellect, meat would be the ego, and the milk would be the awareness itself, if you want to put it in that way. I'm venturing forth with an interpretation of this of my own. So basically you could say these 5 levels of the coconut go very well in the spiritual teaching about I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. And that's true when the mind's immature, when the coconut's green. But you're not going to know that till it begins to ripen, and you can actually observe, as Zen likes you to do, the process of ripening, or the process of finding the ox again. So here's how it was put. The phrase, "it is all one," gets bantered about often by beings who have not yet discriminated between the body-mind mechanism and the Atman. The crucial practice that is known as separating the wheat from the chaff in spiritual circles. Once this viveka is accomplished, the soul comes to know that consciousness and matter are 2 very different principles and can never be one with one another, just as oil and water cannot mix. Happily, I have this right on hand, and we teach the children that. Does consciousness and matter mix? Apparently so. You see, but if you put this in front of the children, or the adult children you're talking about, and watch for some half minute or 45 seconds, you see that they don't mix at all, that they do not mix. There's no way to mix them. So, a very good teaching about how Dehajasa Hamkara has become the first evolutive Maya out of India into the ears and minds of people of different religions. Some of them who don't have that philosophy. They're still laboring under I'm a sinner or something like that. Or they're still, if they have a higher philosophy, they're still laboring under the fact that everything goes back to heaven, or higher than that, to the Word. But you have to go to where the Word meets its source. That's why I chanted, Yatsya Nyatsya Matmani Tam Nyatsya Buddhaudiyam Tam Purnatmani Buddha Sakshini. You have to know that you have to take the words, take them into the mind, take those 2 into the intellect, take those 3 into the ego, take those into the witness, then take that into the Atman. So that's 5 things, isn't it? So we have our stages of lion taming, just like Zen has put it in its terms of its 10 ox-herding statements. It's all a journey back to the source. An external stripping away of name and form to find out that you still exist. You see, I mean, most people won't give up their clinging to life, as Patanjali says, until they let go and find out that they still are there. They think they're the thing. So when the thing dies, decays, disappears, dissolves, gets destroyed, whatever, gets lost, they're still there, but they don't have the wherewithal to affirm that. Hey, wait a minute, I'm still here. That thing I loved so much is gone. See, my food, everything, but I'm still here. Hasta Amalaka Stotram puts that very nicely. And so now we've seen this, you see, beginning to show us the truth. That's how matter can explain spiritual truths that Sri Ramakrishna was so engaged in trying to tell us through simple stories like Zen ox herding, if that's what was going on. But Hasta Amalaka Stotram, as I was saying, could explain that to us musically. Manas chakshuradhir vimuktana swayam yo. Manas chakshuradhir manai shaturada. Manas chakshuradhir agamya swarupaha. Sanitya palabdis swarupaham Atman Ya eko vibhati svabhataha shuddha chetaha Prakasha swarupina neva desho Sharaboda kasto yatabhananekaha Sanitya palabdis swarupahamatma Sanitya palabdis swarupahamatman Translated as meaning. Even bereft of sense experiences, mental cognitions, and vital functions, that internal reality continues to exist, for it relies upon nothing. It is that which animates the senses, compels the life force, and awakens the mind. That perpetual being am I, self-effulgent, eliminating the cosmos. So you have three very powerful layers of teaching right there in terms of what we were just talking about. If you take away everything, there you are. You see. So they want you to have that experience. If you're attached to it, you're probably not going to have that experience. If you're attached to it for centuries and lifetimes, it's a far cry that you're going to understand something as simple as that, even when it's told to you by a luminary right in front of your eyes and face, when it's proven by philosophy, which can be proven by Indian philosophy. So that's one layer of that verse that Hastamalaka, this great luminary, realized and put into the stotram. Then he says, although it doesn't rely upon anything, but it still animates the senses, impels the life force, and awakens the mind. So there are these layers again. Your body, your mind, your intellect. That's what he's saying there. All of those are being animated by this underlying force. Even the prana itself, which animates other things, gets animated by Shakti. And Shakti comes straight out of Brahman, like a shadow of a man. Comes out of his body. So these things are yours. You see. So see them. If you're not, get rid of your attachment to them. Know yourself to be other than that. Take them back and use them. You see. It's just all, in every method that is a viable method for seeking and realizing formlessness, which are probably not that many in the world in terms of religion. There you have the methodology and its stages. So, why, what, where, when, and who. I could bring you that chart, right? Why means cause and effect, karma. When means time. What means objects. Where means location. You ask questions on that level, then they just don't give you any final solution. Those are all Mayic, those 5 W's. See, well, the 5th W is called who, so that gives you a clue out of that cycle. It's the same here with this Advaitic teaching in Vedanta. That's why we want to even up the score here 1 to 1, you see, because we had Zen was ahead 1 to nothing on the double header last weekend. So now we're evening it up 1 to 1 to show how Advaita explains the all-pervasiveness of Brahman. It's in everything, but it's not the thing. And once you understand that, you can use the thing without fear. Beautiful slokas in the Upanishads about that, and Shankara's teachings in the Vivekananda. This is the point they're trying to make, whereas most people are stopping at, all right, I can give up so much, and that's it. You see. Or I can give up everything. I'm not even going to call myself a self anymore, and still not reach the essence of what they're trying to say to you. See. So the third level of that verse is that perpetual being am I. So they're not going to stop and let you get away with just negating everything and just, I think I'll live in some green state of immature oneness. I have to then own up to the fact that I am all there is, that thou art, aham brahmasmi, pragyanam brahman, ayam atma brahma, and tattvamasi, that thou art. The four great sayings out of the time of the rishis. They wanted to make sure those four were inserted in the Upanishads, along with others like sarvosmi, everything is, see, or kevala asti. You know, all these beautiful sayings that just took one or two words to say. If you had the right qualification and teacher and you heard those, that was it. Maya was on the run already. In fact, as I chanted at the beginning of the class, pramadana nasandeha kim karishyami vrittiman, all vrittis are gone about the existence of ignorance. I took them on thinking they were right, found out that it wasn't the case. Ignorance not real, so therefore everything else that was born out of my false conception of those things being real is now proven to me to be unreal. See? You can jump to the chase with that, with the Mahavakyas, but it's going to take usually people some gradation, some method. So I brought up the 5 W's. I almost forgot why I did that. Because my teacher used to say, we don't want why, where, when, and what. What we want is a method. So get rid of the 4 W's, and the 5th W, know who you are, and practice a method. So you could say 5 W's and an M, you know, if you want a short mantra for that. See, method's very important. And there are people who, like I said, people who've come into this classroom before I've seen, are wanting to jump to a green coconut oneness and have no M. They think they understand. They've got Zen sickness. So if you want to try and explain that further through a wonderful one verse out of 13, that hasta amalaka, which means fruit in the palm of my hand. Hasta amalaka, fruit, is a kind of fruit. So if you have that fruit in the palm of your hand, that's your Atman. That's how clear your true self should be to you. Hand, fingers, flesh, bones, blood, prana, everything else there is I've taken it on to prove that to myself, that I'm holding, always holding my Atman, or that I'm never alienated, I've never lost my ox. So this is why I say the non-dual versions of religion start you off in the best footing. And they happen to come in certain countries, so people are looking to be born in those countries, not as animals, see, as humans, because human birth is the first great blessing. And then a desire to live a spiritual life comes next. So if you have those two, qualified yourself with that in any given lifetime, then you'll choose that country next time and the best teacher for you and the path that you've already proven. And you'll walk out of the hut of Brahman into the worlds of becoming, and you'll say, I am that. You see, come along, oxen, you're coming with me. You see. And you won't be a kitty looking into the mirror, you see, and seeing a kitty. You'll be seeing the lion of Vedanta. That thou art. So, probably said enough about this teaching, except that we were talking about how consciousness and matter, oil and water, don't mix. So a lot of people can think that they do without having done the practice or the method. So take apart the coconut, we already did that. So Sri Ramakrishna's has given us 2 quotes. Here's another one. The coconut, before it fully develops, is like one solid mass. It is only as it ripens that it turns into layers, like the outer shell, husk, inner shell, meat, etc. The innermost kernel is at first indistinguishable from the layers. Later it loosens and is free from them. Similarly, the human soul is at first attached to its 5 sheets, the upadhis that entrap it: body, energy, mind, intellect, and ego. But upon spiritual maturation, the essence within, known by the seers as Atman, wisely detaches from these coverings and gets free from them. you might say here on earth, and we've said this before, how quickly can that happen? Because everyone gets deluded by Maya, and it's evolutes when they come here. Everyone. So how soon can I see through the appearances of things? How soon? It's like saying, how soon can I remember my past births where I practiced Vedanta or Zen or Tibetan Buddhism? Because all of those are, well, two of them are very old, in America, that is. So you can go look back to these ancient traditions, and you'll want to remember everything that went before. You don't want to fall victim to the dire Vismriti, see, which is right along your avenue of search. You see, it's memory and its loss, right? If you have the advantage of divine memory being in the Divine Mother, you see, then you'll worship her and she'll bring your memory back for you whenever you see her. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Chetaneti Abhidiyate Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Smriti Rupena Samstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Namo Namaha. Om. O Divine Mother of the Universe, you exist in all beings as the form of retentive memory. O Divine Mother of the Universe, you exist in all beings as the form of devotion. O Divine Mother of the Universe, you exist in the memory of all beings as divine love. And on, qualities, attributes that are possessions of the mature aspirant, who sits in ecstasy and savors these inside, while other people are sitting in ignorance down the street, savoring a beer at a tavern. So this brings ecstasy, and that brings fights and arrogance and mistakes and errors and accidents. Like the horrible accident we saw on the road here a couple days ago. Probably had some alcohol involved in that. Well, first Buddhist precept, when you want to talk about Buddhism, is no alcohol whatsoever. They'll put it right to you in that way. No buying, no selling, no imbibing. It's a law in Buddhism. It's never put so distinctly in other religions like that, but you'll see that there in the 10 different principles of Buddhism. We've had that chart before and looked at it. There's the exoteric and the esoteric promises you make. They're like vows, austerities you take. Vrata, you take vows about it. And it's for your best good, of course. So with that final sloka, we see then, in many ways, how Sri Ramakrishna has explained this false superimposition in accordance with false assumption or premature assumption. That's why he often said, you probably won't want to give out this non-dual truth to householders who are raising children and making money. At least don't give it out lightly without some teaching and explanation around it, some dharma. But they need to know too that this play of families and duty and so forth, although it doesn't stand a chance against God and Guru in this country, in this day and time, needs to be inculcated into the tradition and into the society. Then this possibility for freedom will return to our thinking process. Now, let's look then more closely so we make a little headway towards the chart I'm really anticipating is this, comparing this with the Advaita Vedanta lion taming. But first of all, let's make sure we understand, and it actually will be a very simple thing to do when we look at it. I had in mind I could borrow from Coming Home the experience of enlightenment in various sacred traditions, which our founder Lex Dixon wrote when he was just graduating out of Columbia University, and take some 8 or 10 different religions there and talked about them. One of them was Zen ox herding, Zen Buddhist tradition. So, but I really don't need to read about that necessarily, because I've taken what the commentators have said about it and put it in stages. So here you are. We can use this as a story that you're involved in. You've come out of your hut. You're just a salt of earth, meek, mild person, and everything's right with your world. You're living on the land and breathing clean air, drinking water, and so forth. But you come out one morning and things aren't all right. Your ox is gone, and it strikes you, this ignorance, this root ignorance, mula vidya, strikes you right at the heart of things. And you don't realize that it's just hiding behind a bush or it's behind your hut, and you immediately react, which is, again, one of the things you don't want to do, is react emotionally. So you have to seek the ox. So if gotten yourself into this predicament of forgetting your true nature, like that's why I brought up Deha Jasa Hamkara, right? I'm not the body, the ego that thinks it's the body. That's what most people think. So they're starting off on a footing that's not going to be even lead them into a path. See, it's going to lead them into Maya, which is worse than a network of confusing opinions and pathways in many ways. So seeking the ox is going to be awakening, and you're going to have to do it formally. And you'll encounter a maze of pathways, and you'll, through those pathways, experience the dualities. I think this is what this means. Exhilaration and desolation is how it's put by our founder here. You're sometimes exhilarated by these new paths, then they leave you flat and dry and you feel desolation for a while. This is explaining modern times how people feel when their religion lets them down, or their teachers let them down, or maybe they let themselves down, all three. But the beautiful thing about the first stage of ox herding is that you somehow persist. There's a sense of a hidden essence somewhere. Because you remembered the ox, so it thrills you to think of having it back again. And so it prompts people to move on in the path. So then you would look for the tracks. You find the tracks, means finding the wisdom teachings. Follow those tracks, and then they have this stage called fruitful illusion, because you're thinking that each track might be what you're looking for, but usually it isn't. So you're deluded further by this. Nonetheless, the experience itself, put in side by side against the true nature, makes you more certain, more determined to find the true essence in things, because you're not getting essence and satisfaction out of what's along the path. And so you enter meditation. So you say that the quote which I took out of Lex's book here, the ox has never really gone astray. That's the first teaching at the first stage. And the second is, in the finding the tracks level, trampled grasses show signs of the ox's presence. So you're hot on the trail, and so this is giving you some inspiration. Then you glimpse the ox, actually. So you can see how this works maybe in your own life. So you heard of the Atman, and maybe you had a glimpse of it in meditation, or you had a deep religious experience or philosophical understanding, or meditative insight. Those three things, depending on your nature and the level you were at. And that convinced you that this was true. This is why you entered meditation to find this. And so you're enlightened but unawares yet. You've had this awakening. Remember, Lord Buddha himself said, those who have awakened, they're already realized. They just don't know it yet. So Zen follows the Buddha's teachings this way and tells you that you're enlightened but you're not aware of it yet. And so there's not three kinds of beings: the sleeping, the awakened, and those who are trying to awake. Those who are trying to awake, because they've already pursued, realized the ox was missing and pursued it, have already awakened. So they just need to keep moving forward, go forward, as the wise man told the woodcutter. He went deeper into the forest and found better and better stands of trees. So there stands the ox in the jungle. How can he hide? So the self begins to loom over Maya. There has to be something real and sentient, because the unsentient, as we know, tried to mix, but if I watched it and observed it long enough, it didn't mix. So this is a flash of insight that comes at the third stage of ox herding, and it intensifies. So it makes you intensify your disciplines. And this is a very good sign. We know that coming out of the way, our founder, Lexixin, SRV's founder, has put it. He loved that word intensification. He and I used to talk about that a lot. Clarification and intensification, those two things he was very much into. Finally, since you've seen it, you can catch the ox. You see its wild strength. And you have to break old habits to do that. And when you do, you can observe your original mind's intention. It's that it tempers and refines the mind as you do, and begins to sustain awareness rather than ignorance. You're putting more of your attention on the Atman than on the world, or your true self than on the world. And you harness the energy of enlightenment that way. So you catch the ox, you put the tether around it. Stubborn and unbridled, it still yearns for sweet grasses elsewhere. So you have to get on, if you want to go to lion taming, you have to grab the tail of the tiger and hold on. Now you have to tame the ox, and that has to do with regaining intimacy with it. So I was reading about Vivekananda just the other day, and he said that you cannot love others until you love yourself. So the first thing you have to do in Vedanta is learn to love yourself. If you can love yourself, then you can love others, not until. So that's that kind of divine intimacy that you have to have with your true nature. And your true nature has apparently left you back at the first stage. Your ox is gone because you haven't treated it with love and intelligence and knowledge, and you haven't fed it with devotion. All the four yogas can come forth as comparison there. So then observes thoughts, ripens the ego, and attains its ordinariness again. Zen is big on that. It just comes back to its simple state of knowingness. So the way they put that in 12th century, tended, it becomes gentle; untethered, it follows its master. So now you don't even have to worry about it running away anymore, because you've learned the lesson of love and intimacy and ripening. You might say that's where Vedanta would start to put in elements of detachment and renunciation right there. Because then, if you don't put those in, then this illusion of finitude starts to creep back. You start to lose sight of yourself. But if you put those in, the self wants to come to you. See, that's the adhering power in your own will. So now you can even ride the ox home. Illumination visits the mind, spontaneity dawns. You radiate realization. You become aware of the subtle illusion of Maya that covered your wisdom before, and you cognize separation. That's the dangers of separation. You can now become one with yourself again, and you see how subtle the dangers are, to lose track of your true nature. Astride the ox's back, he gazes serenely at the clouds above. So he's content now with himself. He's gained himself back. The next stage, ox is forgotten. So Zen does take you towards deeper levels. All is attained. So there's nothing more to attain. You and the ox are one. Daily life is enlightenment. That's enough for you. That's called, as we looked at last week, every man's consciousness. That's just the way things are. And it's a very simple matter in realization. Satori. It becomes very simple when you gain Satori. Natural. And that's why meditation becomes natural next. Action is meditation then. You can see how this is really getting into Advaita Vedanta via the 4 yogas, like selfless service and karma yoga. And infinite peace visits, and the bliss of two-ness can even be there without danger. For the ox has now vanished, and alone and serene it sits the man. So he's perfectly happy in that state of oneness or even apparent two-ness. Now ox and self both are forgotten. So Zen is taking us even deeper. There's neither delusion nor holiness. One is always open to fullness. Life is enlightenment, as I said, and all things emanate awareness. And this is where shunyata is beginning to dawn. They wouldn't speak of it as an inherent self, for instance. That's not there. That's gone completely. It's just this wide open expanse. The open space beyond religion was how Lex put that when he talked about different traditions. The quote there from the scriptures, he lingers not in the Buddha and passes through the not Buddha. So that's where you had those fancy sayings come up in the 70s and 80s, and the Roshis were coming over and so forth. That if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him, because they were definitely against the personality worship of the Buddha, because it was based in philosophy, it wasn't based in some statement that was supposed to startle you or scare you, but basically Buddha and not Buddha is existence and non-existence, and as long as you have that duality, then Satori is not possible. The simpleness of not two-ness is there. But remember, all of this, and they'll be quick to say, is studying snow conditions. This is an Eskimo studying snow conditions. Because if he doesn't do that, then he won't know the nature of snow. And he won't be able to guide himself in that whiteout of insight. Because that's also a kind of Zen sickness in Advaita Vedanta, whereas you're spreading yourself too thin. And those experiences of light, like at the higher chakras, disorient you. The Kundalini Yoga system says, if you're not prepared for them, they disorient you. It's why people return back to lower centers and develop themselves more and more so that they don't get disoriented amongst that snow of consciousness. Well, there you see the stages. Formlessness to form without change. Again, sounds a lot like Tibetan Buddhism's Great Seal, Mahamudra. Without change, you go back and forth between them as easy as you go back and forth between waking and deep sleep. But you're doing this at a very conscious level. Not as just a matter of body, nature, prana, needing rest, those kinds of things. This is all done in conscious level. All is a circle of emptiness. So there's where you get the Shunyata teaching. Life is manifestation of source. It's a nice way of putting it. And so there's where I was saying earlier, I prepared you for that by saying that you can detach from all these things, but you can then take them back. When you take them back, they don't belong to you because there's no you anymore possessing them. So it's a giving up and taking. So that's like going from form to formlessness, but without the slightest resistance or possession. Either way, that was put back here in this earlier stage. Buddha or not Buddha, those things aren't in the mind anymore. And finally, humans are gone and only transhuman flavor remains. This is the way they put that in English. Seated in his hut, bridle and whip lying idle, he hankers not for the things outside. So he doesn't have an ox to take care of out there. He's not afraid of it leaving anymore because he finally realized that ox and him and everything were inside of him. So he withdraws in perfect contentment to that inner place of peace. And then the final stage of ox herding happens. I've taken you through this very quickly, but it's because we want to see what the score is when we look at the chart on Vedanta after our break. And this is a beautiful part that everyone loves about Zen. I think maybe it might be why people get Zen sickness, because they want to jump to this stage too quick. That's entering the marketplace with helping hands. Sort of the correlation would be is that I want to go help everyone, but I don't know anything yet. I'm just going to make matters worse. I'm a part of a problem, not the solution kind of thinking today. So that would be, before you're qualified, going ahead and trying to do action without wisdom, you might put it that way. The jnanam hasn't matured, so the karma is going to be suspect. As far as Zen is concerned, then, you see that first is perfect emptiness in action. That's right out of the Bhagavad Gita, as we know, Sri Krishna is saying. And transforms poison into nectar. So everything that's of a negative can easily be neutralized by that soul who can move through the marketplace without getting attached to anything, and it has no motive, ulterior or selfless. Zen is so good at getting rid of both sides of it. You think you got rid of the negative and you cling to the positive, and it comes and takes the positive away from you too. No. That's just a higher duality, and as long as you have that positive, the negative is going to come back. You see, they're connected in a cycle. Back here, you entered a cycle of emptiness. So you're going to want to stick with that and not fall into altruism, or I can help the world, or I can help people. All of those things get disproven to you as you get enlightenment, because the world is not real. People, not real. Ghosts, the process, not real. Growth, not real. Birth, death, not real. Worlds, not real. They're all empty. And only I exist. And I am the self in all. So it brings you around full circle to that. I keep thinking of the chart I want to show you about that, where you'll see the stages of how it brings you through negation to affirmation, and then the affirmation gets negated, and you have to go towards realization, and the realization has to go through its affirmation. And the way Advaita Vedanta would talk about this process for the discriminating mind was following Viveka Vairagya. So that's one of the higher aspects we know in India and several other darshans too, transforming poison into nectar. Just taking the negativity out of everything, but not necessarily being left with just the positivity, but actually having a transcendent look at all dualities. So therefore, stripped of powers, causes all to bloom with the highest potential. So just the very presence of the Atman, or Bussho here, just the very presence of that, stripped naked and bare, manifesting its own light without the slightest motive towards doing anything, positive or negative, but just the very presence of the light itself dispels darkness in people and things. So that's how Vivekananda was, just walked around. We saw that in the case too with our founder Lexixon, so positive all the time with his realization and his insight that people who didn't like him loved him when he was with them, but when he left again they stopped liking him again. So it was just this presence of something inexpressible in that being, some light that they had that robbed everyone of their ability to judge or criticize, and just immediately adhered to them. I saw that happening between Lex and Christian fathers and so forth. Left a room one day, the Christian father was sitting across the room from Lex, came back, about 5 minutes, Christian father was sitting there with his arms around him. I was like, what happened in 5 minutes, that made this father just, I think I'll decide to talk to that man. And immediately, ox and he were one. He was one with his ox, you see. So religion was thrown away, and judgments and all that just went away. But they'll come dancing back when you're out of the presence of such and such a person. Especially if the person's gone for 1,000 or 2,000 years, and your lifetimes are still in the drudgery of convention and belief in evolution, and belief in growth, belief in birth and death, all those things. And they come back and they say, what are you talking about? Soul is birthless and deathless. Did you forget that? Well, two of the most beautiful quotes, and this can end our first half, are side by side there around the entering the marketplace with helping hands. There were a lot I could have chosen out of the 12th century script that was quoted by Lexixon here, the scripture there, but these two are the most beautiful. Having turned his back on his true nature, suddenly man is confronted by a maze of crisscrossing paths and treads through forests and jungles to find it. This doesn't just happen to explorers, like Lewis and Clark, going across the United States and seeing the Indians and so forth, and watching Mount St. Helens erupt. It doesn't happen just like with them. It's talking about inner paths over lifetimes that people follow, you see, because they're convinced that they're searching for something, and they're never content with what they are, who they truly are. Dehaja sahamkara, the first evolute, is like there and marching through the human field of minds, convincing people that they're being born and dying, but not giving them to a clue to being reborn, covering that memory of that too, so that they don't have anything to do but just wander around helplessly, like it says here, in a maze of crisscrossing paths. So, mayoi, it's like Maya. In Zen, it's like this delusion that comes on people. When you see, at least old style, you see these yogis sitting in caves, or you see Sri Ramakrishna happy with a loincloth or a cloth on his body, nothing else, no bank account, no money, nothing. And people are puzzling that they're lost in these crisscrossing pathways. He's free of them. If you actually see a person like that, then you start to think, I've really covered myself like a silkworm with all these things, all these attachments, all these possessions, all these responsibilities, and a job that has to support them, and a family that on and on it begins to grow around you, like an incrustation on the sailing ship. That will, once in one lifetime, you'll need to get down there and carve that off. Just a couple minutes left in this first half, so let's look at this final quote in Zen to sort of bring together this part of the Zen ox herding. The nightingale warbles on a twig. The sun shines on undulating willows. If he will but listen, he will at that moment cognize the source. Bussho. It's a Zen koan. So what better way to end Zen ox herding than with a Zen koan? I have a chart and some teachings on those Zen koans too that are very precious. Like woodcutter suddenly realizes that he's a diamond cutter. It's very beautiful. Those put simple sayings in a Zen koan. There are correlations to that too with the mantras and the bejas and so forth in Vedanta, but this is a certain way that the soul gets struck with these sayings, like a nightingale warbles on a twig of a tree, just thrills you if you're sensitized. Sri Ramakrishna would go into high samadhis by seeing someone sweeping with a broom or something like that. You'd wonder, well, how could that happen? Why did he? Doesn't thrill me. So this very sensitized and open, suggestive to spiritual suggestions, just open to them and have an effect right in front of your eyes. So you'd have to see a person sitting in perfect contentment like that to have your first glimpse of what it looks like on the outside. So let's break here, and then we'll come back. We'll look at a version of this that I think closely matches in a more Vedantic way, philosophically, only I think in 9 stages, these 10 stages of ox herding. So here we will close for 15 minutes.